In the Grand Canyon, people do not just disappear, they disappear in similar ways. Different years, different locations, the same outcome. No clear accident site, no consistent trail of evidence, and investigations that reach conclusions without explaining the disappearance itself. When these cases are viewed individually, they seem unrelated. But when placed side by side, a pattern begins to form. A pattern defined by specific areas, repeated circumstances, and official explanations that stop at the same point. This is not about one missing person. It is about what happens when disappearances start to look organized, and why that pattern has never been fully addressed. Are you ready? Turn off the lights, turn up the volume, and hold on to your pillow, because after this video, you will never look at these cases the same way again. Where the pattern began. The first signs of this pattern appeared in April 1928. His name was Lewis Cave. Louis Cave was a prospector. He was not sightseeing. He entered the Grand Canyon alone. He carried tools and supplies for a planned search. Before he descended, he spoke about his intentions. He described where he expected to travel. He also described when he would return. That return never happened. When Lewis Cave did not come back, concern spread quickly. People knew this was not typical delay. Search efforts were organized. Rangers and volunteers focused on the areas he described. They were not guessing at first. They were following a stated plan. Teams checked descent routes and common shelves. They checked places a prospector would likely stop. They confirmed a crucial detail. Lewis Cave had entered the canyon, but after that confirmation, the trail went quiet. No campsite was located. No tools were recovered. No supplies were found. There was no confirmed injury site. There was no point where a fall was clearly visible. The search expanded outward. It moved beyond the expected route. Rim observers scanned likely ledges. Teams checked drainage lines and side canyons. The Colorado River corridor was considered, but there was no evidence he reached it. In a disappearance, objects usually tell a story. A torn pack, a broken container, a piece of metal. In this case, the story was missing. Nothing was left behind to explain a decision. Weeks passed with no discovery. The operation slowed. Then it ended. Louis Cave remained officially missing. Decades went by. The canyon kept its silence. Then in 1976, human remains were discovered deep inside the canyon. The skull was identified as Lewis Cave. That sounded like closure. It was not. The location did not match the route he described. It was not near a known trail. It was also not consistent with an obvious fall site. There was no clear reason he should have been there. And there was another problem. His belongings were still missing. No tools, no supplies, no personal items that might explain movement or timing. Just a name identified late. The official conclusion pointed to exposure. Exposure is possible in the Grand Canyon, but exposure does not explain everything. It does not explain the missing equipment. It does not explain the route deviation, and it does not explain why nothing else surfaced. Lewis Cave entered with a plan. The canyon returned only a fragment. This case became a marker, the first point on a timeline that would grow longer. The case that shocked the nation. Only months later, the canyon produced another case. This one drew national attention. October 1928. Their names were Glenn Hyde and Bessie Hyde. They were newlyweds, but they were not naive. Glenn Hyde was experienced on rivers. Bessie Hyde had already proven she could endure hardship. Their trip was not a rumor. It was a documented attempt at a speed record. They planned to run the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. They traveled by wooden scow. On October 20th, they reached Lee's Ferry. This was the last established checkpoint. People saw them there. People spoke with them. They appeared calm and prepared. Their boat looked stable. Supplies were on board. The plan was clear. Then they pushed off. That was the last confirmed sighting. After that point, the river corridor swallowed them. Time passed without arrival. Concern became alarm. A search was initiated along the river route. Searchers scanned shorelines and likely stopping points. They looked for debris that would indicate a wreck. Eventually, the boat was found downstream. It was upright. It was intact. It was not shattered against rock. That detail matters because the canyon is unforgiving. Violent accidents leave marks. Inside the boat, belongings remained. Food was still there. Personal items were still there. The camera was still there. But Glenn and Bessie Hyde were gone. No bodies were recovered. No confirmed capsize site was identified. No single rapid was officially tied to their disappearance. Officials suggested a sudden accident. That is plausible on this river, but the condition of the boat created friction. A true capsize often scatters a life. A true wreck often leaves damage. In this case, there was neither. The public followed the story closely. Newspapers across the United States covered it. Theories multiplied over time. Some were sensational, some were practical, but the central contradiction remained. Two people entered the canyon corridor. Their boat continued without them. This case did something important. It made the pattern visible to the public. Not just disappearance. Disappearance with surviving evidence that refused to speak. Disappearances that left no evidence. By the 1930s, the Grand Canyon was more structured. It was not a blank on a map. Ranger stations were active. Trails and routes were better known. Visitor traffic increased. So did reports of people who never returned. In this decade, the pattern tightened, not because of one famous case, because of repeated smaller ones. Individuals went missing in routine circumstances. Hikers moving between known points. Solo travelers with simple plans. Occasional workers crossing between sections. People who were expected back. What connected these cases was not identity. It was the absence of evidence. In many missing events, a fall leaves clues. Broken stone, disturbed dirt, visible impact lines. In these cases, the clues were missing. No confirmed fall locations. No damaged equipment found along the likely path. No clear indication of a misstep. Search teams worked with the information they had. Entry points and intended routes. They checked trail corridors. They checked ledges near common viewpoints. They checked drainages where a body might be carried. They checked areas where thirst forces people to move. Still, the searches often ended with the same result. Nothing to anchor the disappearance. Officials used familiar explanations: disorientation, heat exhaustion, accidental falls. Those causes exist in the Grand Canyon, but they do not always erase evidence. Disorientation usually leaves wandering traces. Exposure usually leaves discarded gear. A fall usually leaves a site. In these cases, the record often lacked those details. By late in the decade, the implication was unsettling. Some disappearances did not behave like normal accidents. They ended without a physical story, only an administrative one. A name listed as missing, a file closed or left open, and a family left with nothing concrete. No location, no timeline, no last moment that could be understood. This decade did not create one legend. It created repetition, and repetition is what builds a pattern. Found where they already looked. By the 1940s, search operations evolved. The process became more formal. Defined zones were used, search grids, standard team assignments. Aerial scanning became more common. On paper, this should have improved outcomes. In practice, it introduced a new contradiction. During the 1940s and 1950s, some missing individuals were eventually discovered in areas already searched, not just nearby, in specific places. Sections of established trails, shelves and benches, corridors that search teams documented, places that should not have been invisible. In some recoveries, time became the strangest part. Evidence appeared later, sometimes days later, sometimes weeks later. Officials offered explanations. Animal activity can move remains. Exposure can alter appearance. Search limitations can miss small clues. Those factors are real, but they do not explain every case cleanly. A thorough search along a trail corridor should notice key items. A pack, a piece of clothing, a distinctive object. Yet in some recoveries, the first searches found nothing. Then something appeared. This forced a question that search teams hate. Was the search incomplete, or was the evidence delayed? Not in paperwork, but in reality. The Grand Canyon is not a shifting forest. The landscape is stable. Visibility can be harshly clear. Distances can be deceptive. But a known shelf is a known shelf. A trail segment is a trail segment. If teams passed through, why was it missed? Why did it appear later? This period also produced a second discomfort. Case handling remained isolated. Each incident was treated as its own event. No formal public linkage, no long pattern review, no consolidated explanation of why the same issue repeated. By the end of the 1950s, the problem was no longer only disappearance. It was discovery, not why someone vanished, but why the canyon returned them in ways that challenged the search. The modern silence. By the 1990s, the Grand Canyon entered a new era. It became a high-volume destination. Trails were mapped in detail. Visitor services expanded. Communication tools became common. Radios, satellite devices, later mobile phones. This should have reduced uncertainty. It did not. From the 1990s through the 2010s, missing persons cases continued. Not all remained unresolved, but enough did to keep the pattern alive. What changed was the information environment. More devices, more records, more systems, and yet data was fragmented. Cases were handled independently. Reports were closed by different processes. Different agencies touched the same event. Park operations, county response, state resources, federal resources. Families often found the system hard to navigate, not because people refused to help, but because information was scattered, and scattered information creates silence. In many cases, the last contact was clear: a departure time, a planned route, a message that sounded normal. Then nothing, not a gradual fading, a stop. Search operations deployed, ground teams, aerial scans, river checks when relevant. Sometimes recoveries came quickly, sometimes they did not. And when they did not, the closing language often sounded familiar: likely exposure, probable fall, possible disorientation. Those are realistic outcomes. But the pattern became the problem. When physical evidence is not recovered, conclusions become assumptions. Assumptions become closure. Closure becomes silence. And silence looks like a decision. This period also created a strange effect. More stories, less synthesis. More individual cases discussed, fewer official connections drawn between them. It became possible to know many events happened, without knowing how they related. That is how patterns hide in plain sight, not through secrecy, but through fragmentation. The pattern no one addresses. From 2010 to the present day, the pattern continues. It also becomes harder to dismiss. Modern visitors enter the Grand Canyon with advantages: high-accuracy navigation, weather forecasts, route tracking, emergency signaling options. In theory, this should prevent vanishing. In practice, people still go missing. Some are found, many are not, and the same structure repeats. A starting point is confirmed. A route is planned or shared. A return time is expected. Then contact stops. Sometimes there is no distress signal, no call, no message that suggests panic. The line goes quiet. Search operations begin quickly, not days later. Often the same day. Teams deploy with modern tools. Aerial units scan wall faces and benches. Ground teams check known corridors. Technology adds another layer: thermal scanning in certain conditions, digital mapping of search coverage, tracking of likely movement zones. Still, outcomes remain inconsistent. And inconsistency is where the pattern lives. In some cases, searches end with nothing. No confirmed fall site, no recovered pack, no items that establish direction. Then a conclusion is issued: probable exposure, likely fall, possible disorientation. Sometimes those are correct. Sometimes the evidence is too thin to know. Over time, many similar cases accumulate. Some appear in public reports. Others are briefly reported in local news. Many are carried privately by families. They span seasons. They span different park sections. They span different visitor profiles: experienced, inexperienced, solo, in groups. But the endings rhyme. Contact stops. Evidence is limited. Explanations stop short. Files close. There is no widely known public synthesis tying modern cases to early ones. No comprehensive review that lays the pattern out plainly. And that is the final discomfort. Not that the canyon is dangerous. Everyone knows that. The discomfort is that the same unanswered structure repeats across generations. Lewis Cave, the Hydes, the missing in the 1930s, the recoveries that appeared where teams already looked, the modern era of technology, and still the same endings. This is not a single mystery. It is a timeline, and it is still unfolding. The Grand Canyon has not changed. Its size, its terrain, its risks. What has changed is how often the same questions return, and how often the record fails to satisfy them. This video did not attempt to provide a final answer, because none exists. It placed the cases in the order they occurred, and allowed the pattern to speak for itself. If you found this investigation valuable, consider leaving a like. It helps support content that looks deeper when the answers are not easy.